Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for attending this morning's presentation. It's going to take about, I know we've got an hour, but I'm not going to take an hour, probably 30 to 40 minutes. And there is a little question box. If you sort of make questions now or at the end, and I'll take all the questions then. Trying to do the questions and the presentation at the same time, I've found is a bit like trying to pat your head and rub your stomach at the same time. So I'm going to focus on the presentation and then I'll take the questions at the end. So yeah, my name's Robert Pratton. I'm the CEO and founder of a company called Conductor. And our mission is to make everyone's life an adventure. And the way that we do that is by creating immersive experiences. If I can get the slide to advance. Yep, we do this by creating immersive experiences. So we're a software company, and what we do is we combine storytelling with technology to help people achieve their full potential in life. And where this is relevant for business continuity and crisis response is that we create crisis simulations so that people can train in a much more realistic environment. And this is just one example of a project we did for CNET training. So it's for data center managers, and the interface kind of simulates what you might get on a normal sort of desktop. So you get fake Twitter messages and WhatsApp messages and so on, phone calls, the website goes down and so on. So all these things are simulated and it looks like a much more realistic experience. And so that brings me on to the premise of today's presentation, and that is train hard, rest easy. So what I'm saying here is that it's a bit like athletes, you know, or sports players. When they've got a big competition, they might go and train at a high altitude, and then when they return to sort of sea level, they're like gods because their bodies have adapted to training in a much harsher environment, and now they're much more able to deal with the tournament. And so it is with training for crisis teams. A crisis is going to be a stressful time for everybody involved. And so it's much better to train in a stressful environment under sort of difficult conditions so that the people would adapt and they're much more familiar and used to the types of dynamics that are going to be in play during that tough time. So this is another point I want to make that's going to sort of follow through this presentation, and that is about the purpose of testing. So it's not really to test that people know what to do, it's to test that things don't fail. And I mean, you could say that these are two sides of the same coin, and I guess they are, but it's a different mindset really when you're developing your tests. If you're going into it thinking, what is it that I can do to try to get people to trip up, I guess is one way to put it. You want people to make mistakes now in a safe environment so that you can bring out the learning points and they discover something that they did wrong, and then they won't repeat that same mistake, or whatever it might be when the real situation comes up. And this is why simulations are a really powerful tool for doing crisis training. This chart I've borrowed from the American Department of Defense, and that sort of solid line in the graph is basically your learning curve, and it's showing that you start in the classroom, or schoolhouse as they call it. So you start in the classroom and then you go through live training and you actually get deployed into service, and then after deployment you see that it's what's called skills fade. Your competency kind of drops off over time, but the dotted line is showing what happens when you employ simulation. So you get a much faster, you're on a much faster track to experience. And when you go into deployment, you're already ahead of the curve and you have a much sort of smaller step to take rather than sort of ramping right up as you might do before. And because this is in some ways, a refresher of the simulated training that you've done, the skills fade is less. And you can definitely employ this in crisis training. I think that one of the sort of problems, I guess you could say, is that I've taken this diagram from a book on on business continuity training. And we see this, we see live training, which is obviously the best thing you can do, is very disruptive to the business, because it takes a long time to plan. It all has to be coordinated because we've got real people moving in real places. And what you can do with simulation is have a much less disruptive testing environment, as similar to sort of just using a sort of PowerPoint walkthroughs, but you've got a much greater fidelity of the experience because people are actually interacting in real time with a system that looks like the thing they're going to use in real life. And so it's got the low disruption of the type of exercise you might do prior to a live event, but with a much greater accuracy and much greater learning experience for the crisis team. So in today's presentation, based on what I said before about the premise, is to give people rigorous testing and to try to find ways to sort of trip them up, I guess, to try to find points that you can highlight, things that we don't want to go wrong in real life. We're going to look at team processes and how individual processes contribute to the team dynamic and the team successes. And then I'm going to finish at the end with, I've called it a playbook. I've got, I think, about 6 or 7, maybe 8 examples of types of things you can do to, that you can introduce into your team testing to find the sort of stresses and weaknesses, the vulnerabilities in the crisis team. So a lot of the diagrams that I'm going to show in this coming section are from a book called Team and Collective Training Needs Analysis by Huddleston and Pike. It's a very academic book because Huddleston's an academic, but it's a brilliant book. And what I've done is I've tried to basically distill what is a very big book with lots of detail into some easy few slides that's much more digestible for a sort of a business audience rather than an academic audience. So in this first diagram, time is running left to right. We have a crisis on the left, and we want to restore the business to sort of normal operations. And what I'm showing in the center are 2 sort of major processes that occupy the team. So one is communication, and the other is coordination. And inside each of the main processes, I'm showing sub-processes. So you can see that if I look at the coordination, if I just go to the right, the coordination relies on a lot of individual actions. And it's here that, if somebody, someone can let the team down at any time, but it's here that we see that like knowledge, skills, and attitude, can really mess up the coordination of the team, maybe the internal politics or whatever it might be. And we can look at that in a little bit of detail going forward. And on a communication side, we see that the sub-processes are basically first to understand the situation, then to agree amongst the team what the goals are to get us towards this normal business, and then create a plan. And then we move over to the coordination to actually implement the plan. So let's look at what's going on in that sort of understand the situation area. And I'm using another diagram from the US military. This is the OODA loop. And it shows here, observe, orientate, decide, and act. So what's happening initially when a crisis or an incident happens is that the team is in this environment and they're trying to pick up lots of cues and information. The unfolding circumstances are giving them information, and they need to observe that and then orientate themselves to make sense of what's going on. So that orientation bubble is really about sense making with the information that's being delivered to them. And you'll notice that what impacts the sense making is your previous experience, your sort of culture, your point of view. And this is an argument for having a diversity of age and sex and ethnicity in the crisis team, because we're all interpreting what could be the same information in different ways. Everyone views the world through a different lens. And it could be that, if everybody sees the world in the same way in the crisis team, it could be that you run off, you get this sort of group think, and everyone runs off and does the wrong thing. So it's quite good to have diversity, so that everyone can sort of give a point of view about what they think might be happening, because the information that's coming in isn't going to be complete. It's going to be ambiguous, and it's going to require interpretation. And then if people don't decide to do it, if they decide not to act, that's going to impact the environment. And of course, if they act, that's also going to have consequences. And so we see, the later stages of the orientation actually impacting the environment again, and causing the team to constantly go through this loop, deciding, are we actually making progress or not? So this is the most complicated diagram that I've got, you'll be pleased to know. So what this is showing, if you look at the bottom now, is that we have this environment where we're getting information in about the crisis, and we're trying to decide in the next box in the processes what we should do. So we have a distributed perception amongst the team. We want that to be the same perception. We want to all agree what the goal should be, and then we're going to do some planning. And then finally, we have the outcomes. Now, if when you're doing your crisis tests, you're only looking for expected outcomes, so you say, yeah, you did the right thing, that's good. And if you did the wrong thing, obviously that's not so good. But what this model does is it helps you look for where you might be going wrong, why those outcomes might not be as you expected, or even if you did well, what was it that the team did well or the individuals did well in order to get that outcome. So you should be looking at more than just the final results. Now, above this sort of like these arrows are the attributes that the individual and the team bring. So the individual brings their own knowledge, skills, and attitude. And we've got this thing here, emergent states. So emergent state is basically how people change under the pressure of the crisis, or under the pressure of the team action. And something like fear and panic is very contagious. And and you could imagine that in a crisis, people are raising their voice, they might be shouting, or some people sort of retire into themselves and they don't contribute as a member. And these states are very important to observe and to address, let's say, because I said, like, the fear is contagious, and if people start sort of shouting off at each other, it's not going to be an environment conducive to having a sort of calm, controlled evaluation of the situation. Over on the right, we've got some team attributes, and I'm showing adaptability, cohesion, and organization. So I'm going to move off of this slide to this one. So with the team attributes, adaptability looks at how flexible is the team to bring in a new plan if the current plan isn't working, or if circumstances change and they need to adjust and refocus. So they were heading due north and now they need to go east or some other direction. How quickly can they make that happen through the communications and through coordination? Cohesion is how well the team works together as a unit. So I mentioned internal politics before. Is that getting in the way of people cooperating with each other? Are these emergent states getting in the way of the cohesion? There could be that you've got divergent goals for different people, and this is affecting the cohesion. And then we've got organization. So the organization looks at the different roles and responsibilities, and I'm going to look into that a little bit now. So this, if you attended the last webinar a few weeks ago, I looked at how to write scenarios so that we're much more engaging, much more immersive. And I introduced these things on the left, the stress, the emotion, intuition, and consequences, as things that you should introduce into the into the scenario, into the training exercise, in order to make it realistic. And so you see there, if you want to create stress in an exercise, then introduce scarcity, complexity, conflict, in order to make it much more like a real crisis event. And on the right-hand side, what I've done is I've added in these new sort of team dynamics, the adaptability, the cohesion, and the organization. And this is pointing to things that we might test so that we can actually make the team more resilient to these types of stresses and strains in a real situation. So let's look at, just go back one. So I'm going to look at that team organization, so the asymmetry, the parallelism, and the trust. So parallelism is basically looking at how much overlap there is between roles, between the roles in the team. Now, this diagram on the right is one I've taken from Rafe Costa, who's a game designer, and he's been looking at multiplayer games and how people need to coordinate actions in multiplayer games. And the circles represent different roles in the team. And what you see is that in the left-hand diagram, there's a lot of overlap. So that means everyone can do everyone else's job. And over on the right-hand side, you can see that there's a high degree, there's a low degree of parallelism. It's not possible for each person to do someone else's job. So they're very specialized in their position. So this would be important to know for your crisis team, because if you lost a key member of that team, I don't know, maybe like a forensic cyber expert, who's going to step up and replace that person if they're not available, or the the corporate communications, who's going to step up and manage the communication to external stakeholders if that person's not available for either at all or for any period of time. And if anyone plays games in virtual reality, this is a good illustration. It's the Star Trek Bridge Crew game, and in this game there's 4 different people playing 4 different roles. So you're on the bridge of the Star Trek Enterprise, and up front you can see the shared information that everyone's got in the team. This is where we're heading, so this is the goal: get to this star system. Now, each member of the team has got their own role. So there's the helmsman that steers the ship. There's engineering that decides where the power should go. They've got the commander that's sort of setting the strategy and so on. And in order to succeed in a mission, there needs to be really good communication between the teams and between the members of the team. And the helmsman can't set a course at a certain speed without asking engineering to power send the power to the engines rather than to the defense shields, for example. And so you've got a high degree, a low parallelism. Each role is supposed to be doing it, and you've got a high degree of asymmetry. So symmetry looks at how much information is shared, or how unique is that person's training to suit that role. Are they a specialist? And not very easily replaced. So on this, you've got a high degree of information asymmetry. Each person is getting unique information to them that they need to share with other people. But if somebody drops out, it is possible for another player to step into their shoes, because the information you need to do the job is there in front of you. So you might not be as capable as the person that you've just replaced, but you do have the tools and the information available to you to take on that role. And in fact, in this game, it is possible to play all 4 roles yourself by jumping between desk and desk. It's quite a challenge, but it is doable. So you can see that it's something to think about when you're putting your teams together. And I was watching a video from a NASA astronaut talking about the training they do before they go onto the International Space Station. And although they might have specialist roles, they train in everybody else's role as well, because it's no good having a medical officer that suddenly gets a piece of glass in their eye. They're not going to be able to operate on themselves. So somebody else in that crew, because they're completely isolated up in space, has to step forward and take on that medical role in order to repair the medical officer. And if you look at the incident team, you can see that usually there is a high sort of specialization the roles, but maybe it's possible for different people in that team to step up and take over some of the functioning of the team for whatever, if something goes wrong or we lose contact with someone, that we create a little bit more resilience in the team, because people can at least help out with other people's jobs. So what I'd like to do now is look at to kind of go through this playbook of different things you might try to stress the team, to put it under pressure. I was going to take a quick drink. So these diagrams have been completed with our own software because that was the fastest way to create them. So in the top here, I'm showing an inject, which is coming from the exercise facilitator. So when they click that button, content is going to be published to different people in the crisis team. And if you look at each of the cards below, on the right-hand side, it says to role 1, and this is the person in the team that's going to get this information. And on the left-hand side of that card, that's the fictional persona, the fictional character that's been simulated by the system. So what's going to happen on this inject is that the CEO is going to send this WhatsApp message to the team leader saying that the environmental minister is asking about, this crisis of the effluent flooding into the river. In the middle, the middle card, number 3, you see that Tony from IT is communicating to the team facilitator, and on the card on the right, we have site operations talking to the liaison. And in this particular vignette, I'm illustrating the need to share information. So liaison receives information from site operations saying that the temporary repairs are complete and it should stop the leakage for at least 72 hours. But the people who need that information are the CEO and Tony, the people who need that information are the role leader and the facilitator, because they're the ones that are having to respond. So it's just a simple vignette to sort of introduce the nature of the diagrams and show that, one way to check communication amongst the team is to give somebody the information that's required by other people. And obviously if people are all gathered in the same room, that's a different dynamic to having a distributed team in different locations and seeing that they can still coordinate and communicate the information that each person needs to receive. Now, when we want to create friction in a situation, we can create opposing goals for different people in the team. So, for example, over on the left there, we have the leader being told by the CEO that it's costing $20,000 for every hour that production stopped, and we really need to get this thing going. Let's just get back online. And we have Tony from IT telling the facilitator that he needs another couple of hours to go through the logs. And I think this is quite a familiar situation to most of you, I imagine, where there's been a fault and the business just wants to get everything back up and running again, but the people that are responsible for investigating that fault are saying they need more time to investigate, because yes, they can get the system back, but the next time this occurs, they won't have any of the analytics information. They won't know the causes of the downtime. And so what you've got now is 2 people in the team that have got opposing goals that are pulling against each other. And just to spice things up, the communication on the right there from site operations asking, can we restart production? You see it's going to the team. So it's going to everybody. So anybody in the team in this exercise could step forward and press the button to say, yeah, let's go ahead, or no, let's stop. And that message would affect everybody in that team. So it's a good way to see how the team performs when you introduce the friction. Can they get along with each other? Can they work out a compromise? What are they going to do if this happens in real life, as indeed it will? So this is another vignette. It's called Hidden Profile, and what happens in this sort of situation is you send information to the team in a way that most people get the wrong information, and maybe only one person gets the right information. And you'll see that often they go with the group, they go with the majority, go, well, we've all got this same information, therefore it must be right, rather than looking for further information to support that belief. They just think, well, because we've all got it, it must be the right thing to do. So in this example, I've got shooter on site. When the facilitator sends the inject, we've got someone from the public talking to the communication coordinator saying they've seen the gunman in the car park, but we have two other people that are communicating to the team saying that they've seen the gunman in the gym. And this could obviously have significant consequences if you make the wrong decision, if you send the law enforcement to the wrong side of the building, or if you need to evacuate people and you send them to the wrong side of the building. So it's a good illustration of requiring people to actually dig a little bit deeper and don't just go on the fact that most people are saying they've got the same information. So looking at how we can sort of wind up people in an exercise, time is a really good one. It's always in short supply, especially in that golden hour, in that first hour when you have to get everything in place, because that could have a big impact on how things unfold further down the line. And what we're showing here is just presenting to someone a simple timer, saying to them, you've got 60, in this example, you've got 60 seconds to make a decision, and just showing a timer on their screen that counts down. That is enough to throw people off their game quite often. So in this particular vignette, there's no consequences of that. It's just really trying to stress them out, to remind them that they're in a time pressured situation. Taking that a little bit further, I've called this one rebuke on no response. So in the first instance, in the first inject, someone is told they've got to react in 5 minutes. And where we might normally use this would be, for example, like a journalist contacting the team saying, I'm going to go to press, I'm going to give you 15 minutes to give me an explanation of what's going on. If I don't hear back from you, I'm going to go with no comment, or I'm just going to invent my own story, or if you don't give me a reaction to this other negative information that's coming from social media. And what we're doing here, you see just underneath the inject, we're adding everybody to group 3. Well, we're adding role 3 here to group 3 to signal there's no response. And it's only when they respond that they get taken out of the group. So in this case, 5 minutes later, when the next inject comes, which is a timed inject, you're going to get a follow-up message saying, why haven't I heard anything? And this can be very frustrating if you're in the middle of trying to do something and someone's getting back saying, I expected a response and I've still not got anything. And phone calls can be very intrusive. And what we're showing here is if someone keeps trying to reject, so we're creating an automated phone call that goes out to someone, and if they keep rejecting it, we're just going on a timer and going back through the loop, and we're just going to keep sending this phone call until they finally answer it, because we feel it's important for them to be stressed, and there could be important information on this call which for whatever reason they're not dealing with at this time. So there's no getting away from this one. So also kind of related to time is the content overload. So scarcity of time here is played out by too much content to analyze at any particular time. And this is why it makes good sense to have roles in teams. So you can say to someone, right, you do that, only tell me if there's information I have to actually act upon, or if you see anything of interest to everyone, share that with the group. So the way to sort of get through some of these exercises when there is a lot of information is to divide the task into these different roles and have good communication. But certainly keep seeing social media unfolding and different emails coming in. It does create a lot of stress and creates a realistic environment. So this is my final little vignette. it's about problem solving. So what's happening on the left is we're sending some detailed information in the form of a PDF manual about a pressure washer installation, and someone's being asked to decide whether it's okay to restore the automated control on the pressure washer. So the expectation here is they're going to have, if they're not familiar with that piece of equipment, they're going to have to dive into the manual. So that I've showed this information all going to the same people, but it could be that you know that the answer to that question lies within another expert. It could be that several experts have to coordinate in order to come up with a response. And all of these things you can test through the exercise, like how quickly did it take for information from, to get from one person to someone else? Was it used in the problem solving of the exercise to get us to where we want it to be? So yeah, so that's that really concludes the presentation. And I think the big takeaway really is this chart, because it allows you to look at it and think, which of these aspects of training can I introduce to make it more realistic, to make it to create an environment that really stretches the teams so that they're much more experienced in when a real crisis comes along. And all of the exercises, the vignettes that I've given, you can actually try them out yourself. So if you were to download our software, you can try it now, and you can just experiment with different things that you might do with your teams. So thank you very much. So it took about 30 odd minutes, and I hope that you might have some questions. Thank you very much for listening. Okay, so I've got some questions in about. So there's one question here about the odor loop. If you basically just Google it, you'll find a lot of information. Wikipedia is quite a good source for looking into that. It's basically about how teams, not only teams but individuals as well, orientate themselves to a situation, making sense of the environment, and then deciding to do something, and being aware that their actions will impact the environment. The question about the which business sectors mostly use our software, it's across the board really, from the Foreign Office, for example, use it, as well as corporates like Pepsi and training companies like CNET Training. So it's not exclusive to any one particular field, and we've even done self-paced exercises with it for news organizations. There's a good cyber crisis simulation we did for Al Jazeera that's available about Syria's electronic warfare. So so any business of any size can use it. Specific document we can use when planning a simulation exercise. I mean, our documents are probably the best ones because they're, because it's so easy. One of the problems with when you think about simulation is people imagine that it's going to be very complicated, and of course they could be if you wanted to do it that way. But our solution is very straightforward. It's very sort of pictorial, very drag and drop, because it's designed to be used by a regular sort of person in the office, not by a specialist analyst. So it's very easy. So I would visit our site at conductor.com and use the resources there. Yeah. So the slide for the free trial is this one. Yeah. If you go to crisis.conductor.com, then please just go there and try it out. I will share this presentation. Yes. What I'll probably do is upload it to SlideShare, and then you'll be able to get hold of it there, and you'll also be able to get it from our blog. So please, I'll make sure that you'll get a copy. And I think the webinar is going to be recorded, or it has been recorded hopefully, and you'll be able to access a rerun of the webinar. How do you get management to sort of buy into this? I think right now, lots of people put off training of this type because they feel it's very disruptive to the business. If you look at a live exercise, it takes a lot of organization, and so often they fall back on just doing PowerPoint type presentations. But the PowerPoint presentations, they're not very realistic. They're boring for the people that give them, never mind the people that actually have to sit through them. So they're not very effective. And if you want your business continuity training to be more than just a tick box exercise, you have to say to management, we need to test people in realistic conditions. Now, that doesn't mean you need to really throw people in at the deep end, because I know this presentation has all been about creating the right stresses and the right environment. But, there's this phrase about being able to sort of crawl, walk, and then run. You can still use the simulation so people get much more comfortable, responding live to an event as it unfolds, rather than having someone place a piece of paper in front of them. But and then gradually kind of increase the intensity as you feel that they're able to deal with it. And the management buy-in is well, when do you think these people are actually going to? Don't you want confidence that the people entrusted to save the organization will actually do their job when things go wrong? Because otherwise, if the first time we find out that this person's really flaky, this person's got a terrible temper and he's going to start kicking chairs across the room, you don't want that moment to be when you've got a crisis. You want to find that out in a simulated exercise. And it's also a bit frustrating to do that on a live exercise, because you've spent all that time, maybe you've spent a year or several months planning this live exercise, and then it all falls apart. Either because people don't know what they're supposed to do, they don't have the right information. And so by simulating ahead of time, you're going to get a lot more value out of the live exercise. So there are many ways to justify the simulated exercise. You can formulate the results from the application, yes. So there's live information that goes back to the facilitator. You basically, when you create the simulation, you can go in and add a data point to any particular decision, and when someone makes that decision, you get a live if you're the moderator, you get a live notification that someone's made that decision. And you can even test teams in parallel, so you could have several teams all running through the same exercise, and that information is broken down in by team, and you can get a little pie chart to see what the different teams are deciding. Is everyone going in the wrong direction? Is everyone doing the right direction? And that information is also presented on a timeline, so you can see how long it took for information to get from A to B or whatever it might be. In fact, the someone in the military told me that one of the things they like to do in their exercises is transpose GPS coordinates. And what they want to do is see how far through their sort of the chain this like misinformation gets propagated. So the GPS comes in, they get told just switch those coordinates over, so longitude is now latitude and vice versa. And at what point does somebody actually check that is a valid map reference? And that's all tracked on a timeline in our system if you were to do it that way. What we hope to have after the summer is the report auto-generated as well. So and any qualitative, if you say to someone, respond to this tweet, or write an email response back to this particular stakeholder, all those qualitative responses also go back to an exercise control feed for the moderator, so they can draw that out in the after action review at the end of the training session. You've got all of that information available to you to sort of feedback to the teams and discuss what did and didn't go wrong. Yeah, so how do you judge what factors worked and what didn't work? Sometimes you might need human observers to watch the team at work, basically. So it depends. One of the things that we're doing, because our corporate mission is to become a global leader in mixed reality environments. So one of the things we're looking at doing is putting sensors into a room in order to pick up indicators of team stresses, team communication processes, and so on, to try to digitize some of that information gathering as much as we can. But right now, I think the best you can do really is to make sure that they're in the exercise, and then have a human observer. And with our system, you can get observer terminals as well. So a note, when the facilitator sends out the inject, the observer will get a note saying, watch out for this particular behavior, because this inject has come. I'm trying to stress the situation this particular way. See if this person delivers that information, see how they react to getting that information. And then the observer can make a qualitative observation about how they felt that person dealt with the information and how long it took to go over. And all that gets fed back into this after action review process. Thank you for asking. Great question. So yeah, thank you very much for taking part. I really appreciate you making time to attend the webinar. So the webinar should be live fairly sort of straight away, I think. And then what we'll do now is I'll talk to the team, and we'll be managing our communication and team processes coordination to get this presentation live on the blog, so you can get it. Thank you very much.